Houston, we see you on a stereo.
Conspiracy, lies, truth, helping you understand the lies of the world and see the truth of the Bible. Welcome to Celebrate Truth with your hosts, Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate.
Hey guys, this is Nate Wolfe with Celebrate Truth Radio. Robbie Davidson is not with us in this first hour because he is in a plane, but he is going to be with us afterwards, hopefully in hour two. And I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to add him into the call. But I am holding down the fort tonight, and we do have some information I want to share with you briefly. And then I'll be bringing in our special guest tonight, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But first, I want to just share a little bit about what's been going on with Robbie and myself. Most of you know that Robbie has been in New Zealand for the last, about a month. He had been at the Flat Earth New Zealand Expo conference, and they had a little issue with his little one. Robbie's passport got damaged, and they had to petition the government of Canada to get an expedited temporary one, and that all went through well. And so now they're actually in the air flying to Auckland, New Zealand, and then they have about 3 more legs after that. But when he lands, I'm going to try to bring him in, hopefully during the second hour. And so I'll be the main host for tonight. And again, we will have our guest, whom I'll introduce in a moment. If you would like to go to my YouTube channel, it is Fired for Truth. That's Fired, F-O-R, Truth. I also have a website, which is firedfortruth.org. And if you'd like to message me, I can be reached at nate@firedfortruth.org. Of course, you can check out Robbie's channel, Celebrate Truth, on YouTube. If you just type Celebrate Truth in the space bar there, usually he's one of the top 3 or 4 hits. So check out Celebrate Truth, subscribe, and share if you are not already subscribed. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, and he and I will be holding down the fort tonight. We've got a variety of subjects to discuss, but with us tonight is Noel Hadley, and he is an author and a speaker and world traveler extraordinaire. Noel, how are you tonight?
I am excellent. I refuse to say tonight because this is about 4 a.m. time for me in Europe.
True. Yeah, I should say, how are you this early morning? So I don't know what your normal sleep patterns are, but I'm sure most folks aren't up at this wee hour. So I do appreciate you adjusting your time. I know you're about 6 hours ahead of me, and you are currently in Normandy, France. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it feels great to speak to someone in English. And nice. I feel this will be an interesting experiment for the next couple hours because I feel as disoriented right now, waking up in the dark this early as I have been for the last couple of weeks. So
nice.
This is pretty much my new routine, pretty much.
Wow. Yeah.
So thank you for having me, and it's also exciting to be in the I feel like I'm in the middle of the action right now with Robbie Davidson's life, and he's on an airplane right now, and maybe he'll join us. And I've been able to follow a little bit the adventures of Robbie Jr., and I think he spilled some milk or juice or water on his passport, and as a father of young children myself, it just struck me in the heart. You know, I was there with him.
Yeah. When he posted that on Facebook and other social media, at first I thought he was kind of joking around, and then I was like, no, this is like a legit thing. Like, ooh, this is not good. And of course, they petitioned the Canadian government to get an expedited temporary passport, and he was like, man, we're going to have to stay here at least another week. And as you may or may not know, he's scheduled to speak at Truth Quest Calgary just a couple of days from now. And he was like, man, by the time we get home to Canada, he says, I'm going to have like basically one day to turn around, repack and get ready to, travel down to Calgary for this conference. So he's cutting it very close. And as when we get into our 40s, we don't have quite the energy that we used to, but Robbie always seems to have an extra tank of fuel somewhere. I can barely keep up with him.
Well, I'm only 38 at the moment, and
okay.
And though I I think my twin sons have kind of stripped me of my youth, so I think that's pretty much gone at this point. And I have embraced middle age very openly, and I've been growing a ponytail. So that's I'm already embracing the midlife crisis. I'm there. I'm good.
Yeah. So if you're 38, then you got about when I remember when I was 38, I was in Idaho. I was doing a full-time ministry there, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you better enjoy your last 2 years of your life." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, in 2 years you turn 40." And I'm like, "Yeah, what's the big deal?" He's like, "At 40, that's when everything starts, falling apart and going downhill." And I kind of laughed that off, Well, about 6 months later, I had a nasty problem with my left shoulder, and I ended up having to have arthroscopic surgery. And, that was no picnic. And then the recovery was difficult. And so by the time I crossed over into that 40 zone, I was like, man, I got gypped because it was a solid year before I turned 40 where I was dealing with all of this. I'm like, man, I should have taken that guy's advice. But anyway, so you're getting close, but, middle age.
I've noticed the changes. I go to sleep perfectly healthy, and then I wake up with a sprained ankle in bed. I'm like, how in the world did that happen?
Nice. Well, I'm glad that you've saved some energy for us. Now, before I have you tell a little bit about yourself in general, and then we move into some more specific items related to topics that we typically cover on Celebrate Truth here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio A. I want to just first say, can you tell us a little bit about why you're in France, and what does the next 6 months or so hold for you and your family?
Yeah, well, this is kind of a continuation of the last 4 or 5 years. In 2015, that was right with the explosion, really, of the Flat Earth movement.
Sure.
My wife and I were living in California. We had grown up there. We'd been married by that point for, 13, 14 years after you do the math. And we were just so burnt out of California life, just completely jaded of the culture and everything, that we decided to sell our house and most of our things, gave away most of our things, and we moved into an RV. Some people will know what a fifth wheel was. I always say RV because the fifth wheel goes past some people. But we had twin boys who were a year old at that point, and we had, of course, a slightly side subject, we had spent most of our married life unable to have kids. So this was a great blessing from God to have these kids. And to our grandparents, to their grandparents' horror, we piled them into an RV and drove off. I mean, that was like just torment for them to see that.
Nice, yeah.
But we started driving across the country, and we knew God had a place for us. We weren't really sure where. We specifically knew that he had things he wanted to show us and reveal to us, and many things came out of that trip, including the Flat Earth movement. However, it took about 7 months of actually driving across the country, just driving for 7 months. We pulled up to Charleston, South Carolina, and that's where we decided that would be our new home base. So that's our adopted hometown, Charleston, South Carolina. We found a house there in what's technically an alligator preserve. And our neighbors are, it's one of the 5 oldest homes in South Carolina. The owners of the house opposed the United States in both wars, including the Revolution. They were loyalists instead of patriots. But the double row of oaks that led up to the house is actually what we have to drive down to get to our house. Anyway, so we're there in Charleston now, maybe half the year, and we still, for the last 4 or 5 years have just been traveling all over. And so our kids are at an age now. They're starting kindergarten this summer. Of course, we homeschool. And it's been kind of in the works for a while now, because we decided when they were very young that we wanted to homeschool, but we also knew that we were in a position that we didn't have to just sit around and show them books with pictures of the Sistine Chapel or, or pictures of Kenya or whatever. We thought, hey, why don't we just take them there? Why don't we take them to all these cities, Jerusalem and London and Paris, wow. And, take them camping to Kenya, all that kind of stuff. And so this is kind of that. They're at an age now where this is a little bit of an experiment, because we've been asking, are they old enough to live out of a suitcase now? And they've done pretty well for themselves. And this is the beginning of their education. We're taking them here to France. We've been taking them around to castles for the last week. Like, this is William the Conqueror's castle. Let's learn about William the Conqueror. Let's learn about King John and King Richard the Lionheart and all that stuff. So
wow, that's quite an education right there.
I just had my morning brain kick in, so apologize for that. But.
No worries. So the twins are 5 then?
They'll be turning 5 in July.
Wow. Okay. So we're
thinking of taking them to the Matterhorn for their birthday, but we're not quite sure.
Sweet. Yeah. So you guys are adventurous, but also, I guess the on the road training and education is something that most people don't get to do. I mean, it's quite a unique situation. And although, because you have a home base, but you have done a good bit of traveling, 5-6 months out of the year for the last few years. So you guys are pretty savvy, travelers. Now, is this the first time you guys have been over to Europe? Had most of your previous travel been around the U.S. or?
Yeah, we stuck to the U.S. for the first few years. And no, I've been to Europe. I don't have to do the math. Maybe 6 times, 4 or 5, 6 times before. That was years ago. And, I've been to, all over Africa, Asia, Middle East, all over, lived short term in some of those areas. But so I'm pretty junked in the head over traveling. I've been doing it for such a long time, and most of our married life. So this is the first time, though, that we are doing this together. It's always been, for years, I was, most people don't know this about me, particularly those who've been following me for the last 2 or 3 years within the Truther movement. It's something I don't really talk about. And I've actually not talked about a lot of our traveling because I didn't want to make that my identity.
Yes.
I didn't want people to think Noel the Traveler. And so when we'll get into and we'll talk about the book, Worthless Mysteries and Perhaps Avoid Science Falsely So Called, they were written in just dozens and dozens of destinations. Just, I'll be driving, 400 or 500 miles and just thinking about this stuff, and then we'll pull up to our next destination and I'll write it out. So nice. I've been traveling for years, but I didn't really talk about it much because I wanted people to understand my identities in Christ. And even when you're going to all these locations and you sit around the fire at the end of each night, it's one of my favorite things to do at the end of the day is to sit around a fire. And we've had so many strangers come in and talk to us. And I always want to bring the conversation to Jesus. And the natural inclination for everyone is to start talking about travel and places they've been. That's just the natural default. And as soon as people start asking me about this, I start talking, you start seeing their eyes almost change a little bit because it makes them feel like a lot of people like less of a person, like they haven't lived or anything. And I don't want to come across that way. So I always want to be real careful about that. But a lot of people don't know this about me. I spent a good deal of a decade of most of my adult married life as a wedding photographer. Wow. We were based out of Long Beach, California. So think like Snoop Dogg. And that was our city. And occasionally, you'd pull up to like a stoplight and there's like Nicolas Cage or, whoever. And it's like, I saw Snoop Dogg once at the traffic light next to me, but you do see these people. But for some odd reason, I got very little work. I didn't take off. Nobody knew who I was in California as a photographer. I took off nationwide, and I found myself very quickly. Every single weekend, I was commuting to work by airplane to New York, Chicago, Boston, D.C., Alaska, Puerto Rico, Maine, Hawaii, just everywhere. I became and I quickly realized that any money that I made on the road, if I spent it on the road, I wasn't bringing it home with me. And this would include hotels. So I would start sleeping. There were nights I saved money. I slept on a New York City subway or in the trunk of my rental car. I mean, this wasn't elaborate. That's why I think I said that, Robbie's living the life right now when he has to like get home to Calgary and then and go straight to the next conference. Cause I'm like, that's the life. So,
I appreciate you sharing that information. And I'm sure, you have all kinds of, different experiences, but is there anything else before we start talking about the books and biblical cosmology? Is there anything else about yourself or your family that you want to throw in here while we're starting out?
Yeah, I think it's always important I've learned in the truther movement to pause before I get into discussions with people and just ask what their testimony is or what the relationship with the Lord is like. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just kind of go over it really briefly. I grew up in a parsonage. My dad was a pastor, which makes me a PK. Yes. So you have PKs because you were a pastor 4 years. Yeah. And so I think we had a little bit of discussions about that in the past, and I grew up with a unique perspective in the church because, which is maybe similar to what your kids are going through, whatever. But I grew up seeing church from a political end, the behind the scenes meetings and the accusations of, did you pass the offering plate around a second time? We grew up very poor, and everything that we had in our house was given to us. And back in when I was growing up, I recall like if we went out to eat, like we were like, beans with ketchup and meatloaf people, right? So if we went out to eat, it was to McDonald's, and that would be really special. And my parents would like not buy a Coke for themselves just so we could have a Happy Meal. It was, that kind of upbringing. And it was a wonderful upbringing. No complaints. I really enjoyed it. But my relationship, I think I would say I was saved from a very young age, preschool, 4 or 5 years of age. I understood from a very early age that Jesus needed to be the Lord of my life, that he was the creator of the world, very simple kid logic. Mm-hmm. And I don't like to put dates on salvation or anything like that, because I very much believe that Jesus needs to be the Lord of our life. And so not just looking back of, I had a dream or a vision, or, I invited him into my heart at this age or anything like that. When I became older as a teenager, that's when you coming of age and you kind of I've told people before it's my second conversion, because I had my childhood faith, and then by the time I turned 15, that's where I really realized that I couldn't continue being a Christian if it was my parents' faith. It had to be either theirs or my own. Either I needed to just be true to it, and that's I was in a very small church. And you could probably relate to this too, because you had told me before that you were running the youth group. And so I was the youngest person in my youth group. It was older high school, college age kids. And so it was almost inappropriate for me to be in it. And somebody in the church recognized that, a young man. And I'm, in a way, eternally grateful to this guy, because he came up to me and said, you know what, I'm going to dedicate every Sunday morning for the next year to just spending it with you during the Sunday school hour, and we're going to go through the book of Romans. But we did it in a unique way, because he said we're not going to do a study on Romans. We're going to memorize Romans, and so we sat there every single week, and he was very patient with me. And he said, okay, well, let's do Romans 1:1, and we'd memorize it. Okay, let's do Romans 1:2, and we'd get through the whole first chapter. We'd memorize the whole first chapter, and then let's start on chapter 2. And we got like it by the end of the year. I wouldn't say I was the most ambitious as a 15-year-old, right? And I got into chapter 2, and I had memorized all that. But one day it was in the spring, and I asked myself, oh, this is really interesting. What does the rest of the book of Romans have to say? And so I sat in my room one night and I started reading through the whole book of Romans. And I remember that I started gushing tears. I felt overwhelmed with the realization of my sin and how deserving I was to not be in God's presence, and that the gift of salvation was truly grace. It was something that, it was nothing that I had done. It was Jesus had done everything. And by the end of Romans, I realized how much God truly loved me. And that was my really personalizing the faith. And so from then on, I wanted to get into missions work. And that could be a whole different discussion. How I still kind of see my future in the missions work. I would drop all of this researching and writing in a heartbeat. The moment I feel God saying, "Okay, this is it. Let's do this." Yeah. And so let's see. But it was at the age of 19, and this will eventually work into our conversation on cosmology. When I was probably 17, 18, 19, I was always one of those guys that always liked the weird things in the Bible. Like all those little passages you just skip over, and I'll be like, no, wait a second. What is this? What is firmament? That kind of stuff. What is the great deep? And what are like the locusts of Revelation? All that kind of stuff. And and so I used to pray, like one of the prayers I had at a young age as a teenager, and I used to pray regularly. What is this great delusion? Reveal it to me. I don't want to be delusional, right? What is the firmament? And I used to pray through this stuff, and I feel like God really did answer those prayers. He really did reveal them to me from an early age. I remember at the age of 19, I said it was a pivotal moment in my life, because I was getting into all these debates of doctrine and getting really upset, and people were accusing me of just coming at it with how I wanted to interpret scripture. And I realized, well, they're actually right. I was actually coming at this emotionally, and I wanted a certain perception of who God was. And so I got on my knees and I said, I want to only interpret scripture as it's intended to be interpreted. And that's a tall order, mind you. It took me decades, and I want any listener to know that here I am 38, and if I live to be 80 or 75, I am confident that at the end of my life, when I die, I will still be wrong about doctrinal issues. And I want to make that clear with everyone, because when I write my research, when I compile my research, I'm not if anyone reads my book, Worthless Mysteries, my hope, I'm not hoping that people walk away just being convinced that Noel is, he's all knowing. He's got it all. He understands it. I understand that I am a finite mind. People are going to disagree with me. I could go wake up my wife right now, which would not be a good thing to do, and she would immediately tell me things she disagrees with me. So my hope, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to call her a heretic, right? Sure. And so my hope is that all the research I've done is to not only contribute to the world of research for future use for people to refer to, but also for people my ultimate hope is for someone to walk away and say, you know what, I didn't agree with everything Noel had to say, but I learned something. That was very formative. I got something out of that.
No, and that's a really good goal. And I, like you said, when you sent me your book, you said, hey, it's 700 pages, man. So you might want to just skim through. But I'm kind of, one of these type A guys. So I just started at the beginning and started reading a bunch of essays. And so I want to make sure that we do talk about your latest book, Worthless Mysteries. But let's back up a little bit here. You mentioned something thing. You said as you were a late teenager and you were always interested in these different subjects. And so, and you said that figured into the whole flat earth thing. So tell the listeners a little bit about how you kind of came into flat earth, aka biblical cosmology. And I know that you wrote a book just a couple of years ago. Was it Avoid Science Falsely So Called? So we'll definitely want to talk about Worthless Mysteries, but let's start there because I know a little bit about your background in some of our convos, but some of the listeners might not understand how you kind of came into this topic and wrote a book on the subject.
All right. So I came into it like most others on the internet, right? But I recall there's never been a time in my life where I ever mocked flat earthists. There's a saying that you go into it mocking and attacking, you try to prove them wrong, and then you get proven wrong. That wasn't the case with me. And I know many friends in this movement who would actually say the same thing as me. And when I was a young I remember one of my earlier memories. I grew up in Hawthorne, California. That's when I was a PK in the parsonage. Hawthorne, California is the suburbs of LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. It was the home of the Beach Boys. One of my first job, actually, just as a side note, was working at the Hawthorne Pool where the I went to high school. So for I don't know if there's any Beach Boys fans out there. But I remember sitting out there, standing out in, climbing out of my Plymouth Voyager, my family's Plymouth Voyager. This very car, by the way, is now in the Smithsonian. So it makes me feel a little antique already. And I stepped out, and if you look up into the sky in Los Angeles in the 1980s, I do recall seeing Orion's belt on a good night. And maybe you could see like Mars or something like that. But I remember looking up at Orion's belt, and the rest is, of course, all hazy. Yeah. And having this understanding that from a very young age that God is just right up there. That it was almost, I always understood this idea of a dome and a sheet over. I saw it like a sheet spread over us, and that heaven is physically placed right above us. And I remember as a teenager, one time I was praying, and I've just never really been a Copernican. I've never really bought into that. I never really saw that as being biblical. I remember as a teenager once looking up at the stars and praising God, and I would start saying things, for these stars that are billions and billions of miles away and perhaps inhabited with other planets. And I remember immediately just feeling struck by what I thought was God. Just like, no, like that's not correct. Stop. And it actually threw me into confusion. Wow. I stopped praising God for that because I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. And all those years traveling, this is where it started connecting with me, because all those years traveling on airplanes, commuting to work, I would always look out at the earth and be, where's the curve? And I would start asking questions like, why can't we just hover up here and the earth move? Why is the earth not like, I would start tracking, like I'm going north, but the earth below me, isn't it moving, east to west? Like, like what's going on with this? And so, and it would always make me uncomfortable. Like, why can I see way out there and nothing is bending over the curve, all that kind of stuff. And so anyways, it was in, 2015 was when we all kind of started noticing this uptick online of this flat earth talk. Actually it was probably back in 2001, 2002, 2003, and there, I had gotten wind of the Flat Earth Society. I think they had launched right around then online, and they had a website, and I was really obsessed with this idea of flat earth, partially because I've always been big on the Middle Ages and history, though to be fair, academically, in the Middle Ages, most academics and scholars believe they did live on a globe, and I will stand by that in my research. It's a kind of confusing tale to kind of get to the bottom of it all, but anyways, I went onto the Flat Earth another morning. But Flat Earth Society's website, and I wanted to know. I was obsessed with this idea. Like, wow, there's people out there who believe the Earth is flat, and my assumption was, my conclusion at the time was, they have a reason for believing that. Surely there's a reason they believe that. Yeah. And so I went onto the website, and I went into like the chat rooms, and I didn't make sense of anything. They were kind of all the conversations seemed boring. They weren't really talking about anything, And so my conclusion at that time was, well, this must be some sort of esoteric thing. Like, they have some deep hidden knowledge that I don't have, and it's just not for me.
Yeah.
And so back in 2015, I was driving across the country, and there was a radio program that was a conspiracy radio hour, and it was like a Friday, and I don't remember what station it was, but the host every Friday, he allowed anyone to call in and talk about whatever conspiracy they wanted.
Oh, wow.
And so a guy
open
called
mic
in.
conspiracy night. Wow, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, a guy called in and started talking about flat Earth, and I was like floored. I was like, "Yeah, this is a flat Earth. I want to hear this." And so he started talking about it, and there was no Bible talk, nothing like that. It was just he talked about how the Earth is a ping pong table and the sun is a flashlight, and so I'm trying to like imagine this, and it's like okay. Anyways, so. Finally, eventually, though, and I think this is where it gets good. My first encounter online with a flat earthist was around that time, and I was on YouTube, and there was kind of like a heated debate in the chat under YouTube on the timing of the rapture, and I guess you would call me a post-trib rapture guy. I don't even like to use the word post-trib, but I'm a when Jesus returns rapture guy. And so anyways, but I'm not cruel towards the pre-trib position, and I used to be a pre-tribber, and I respect that position. And I was in a discussion with someone, and all of a sudden someone made the comment, the flat earthists are here. And and I was really excited, like, what? There's flat earthists in the conversation? So I pinpointed these guys, who they are, and they were coming to what we call now flat smacking, right? So they come in there to flat smack all of us. And I approached one of them, and because the conversation was on the rapture, I made some comment, not to mock them, but I said, wouldn't that be really cool when the rapture happens, if I look down at my feet and I see that the earth is not a ball, but flat? Yeah. And his comment to me, his response was, "You're going to hell." And I said, I was a little, I had the same response as you. I was kind of like, I was like, okay. And that's not terribly uncommon to hear, of course, when you go into any internet chat. Yeah. And he said, because you don't believe the Bible. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you don't believe the earth is flat, so you don't believe in the Bible, so you're going to hell. And he was incredibly rude, right? Now, at that moment, I could have said, because of the lack of fruits in your life, that is proof that this is not biblical. I could have made all those excuses, right? But I was like, that interested me. Wow, this is biblical. And my wife and I have always been people who, if you can show us, that's one thing I love about my wife, that she has just the gift of faith. And if you can show either one of us, this is what the Bible says, this is scriptural intent, this is what the Hebrew writer's worldview, we will gladly turn our life around and switch things around to properly align ourselves with the revelation or testimony of God. And so I immediately took this to the Bible, and it was really easy. All I stumbled upon was the 19th century sketch, which is the only illustration I put in my book. You see, it's 700 pages. It's all words, pretty much, except for I put in the very beginning a 19th century pen and ink sketch of the Hebrew cosmology. I don't even like using the kind of above looking down shot of the Earth. And I just like a very abstract. And as soon as I saw that online, I don't remember what website or how I found it, but it just, all of a sudden, the pages of scripture just crackled with animation. It came to life. I'm like, oh, the great deep, the firmament, heaven. But it all came together.
Like word pictures in your mind, and stuff starts to click. And you're like, oh, see, stuff starts making a lot more sense.
Yeah, Jacob's Ladder, the Tower of Babel, and New Jerusalem, all this stuff. It just all came into perspective, and it was really that quick. And all those prayers, I think, over my entire life just came into focus at that moment.
Nice.
And so that's how I came into it. I didn't go vocal. I was in torment for the first year because you want to tell the world, and I kept silent about it. So my wife and she became a flat earthist before I did. I sat down with her for dinner. I cooked most of our meals, and so I cooked her a dinner, and I sat down, and over maybe a 20-30 minute conversation over dinner, she saw that look in my eye, and she's like, you were researching something today, weren't you? And, and just sit in your seat, hold on, let me just tell you about this flat earth thing. And at the end of the conversation, she's like, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm like, no, wow. we're not flat earthers yet. And she's like, no, that sounds about right. Because all I had to do was take it through scripture. And my first question, so I had done all this research on it before presenting it to her. And my first question to her, I then turned it on her. I'm like, yeah, but what about satellites? Yeah. And she said, yeah, they fake that. And it was funny because my wife is a software engineer. And she's worked for, she got a full scholarship, full ride to college, and then full at Cal State Long Beach, and then a full ride to get her master's at USC. And she was a software engineer for Lockheed Martin by the age of 23 when we were married, and worked for Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Booz Allen Hamilton, all these contracted sites that work with the government and such, and so she's had experience with satellites and a lot of that kind of stuff. So I thought she was going to disprove it right there. She's like, yeah, no, I know how they fake that stuff. So wow. That was anyways, I was in torment my first year because I didn't want to really, I didn't come out about it, but like everyone else, I'm just obsessing over it all the time and just watching videos and researching and reading whatever I can. And I've really felt the Lord pressing on my heart to write about this, and I really didn't want to. And that finally, after a year, it was almost a whole year. It was finally in the spring of 2017 that I finally started just writing on my blog about Hebrew cosmology. Like, this is what the Bible says about the face of the earth, and it's just simple little posts like that. And oh man, the fallout was bad and ugly immediately. Lost tons of friends. I've always been one of those guys that's been associated with a lot of pastors and those kind of people, and it was just it was ugly. And anyways, and that breaks into Avoid Science Falsely So-Called, because within 2 months, keep in mind that I'm one of those guys, I've been a writer my entire life. I remember when I was in third grade, I was sitting in my school, and the principal of the school was a private school, but he asked all the students, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, kids were like, I want to be a cowboy or an astronaut.
A policeman, firefighter.
And I said, yeah, it's like, good. He gets to me and I say, I want to be a writer. I was the only person who stopped on that day and said, that's nice. And when that doesn't work out for you, what do you really want to be? Ouch, right? Oh,
man, that's rough. Yeah. Wow.
So
that first year was kind of rough because you have this, fire in your bones to share. But at the same time, like you said, you start opening up, and what happens? You start losing friends, and people start, thinking you're crazy and all kinds of weird stuff. It's not an easy, it's not a glamorous, easy road.
No, it's not. And so I want to stress that I've tried to get publishing contracts my entire life, and I've been writing my entire life. I have just a bunch of books that were just junk because I could never get them published. And I remember once I was in conversations with Tim LaHaye's agent to get a book contract with him, and then he pulled out. So here I am, my entire life trying to get published, and finally I'm deciding to write about flat Earth. But I came out with a different perspective from a lot of people because I'm a historian, so I was very interested in more older views, and particularly the 19th century and then beyond that. And so within 2 months of blogging this, I was actually contacted by a woman named Kathy Dunson. Now, she used to be Zen Garcia's radio partner. And she stumbled upon my blog doing some word search on flat Earth, and she really liked my writings, and she contacted me and said, hey, do you want to publish a book for us? Cool. Do you want to write a book on flat Earth? And my immediate response was, no, I don't want to write a book on flat Earth for you guys. And she took it well, but she understood rejection when she saw it. She's like, okay, well, just think about it, whatever. And she was kind of in contact with me a couple of times, and she actually invited me on their show. I was just a guy who started blogging, and she invited me on their show to talk to them about it. And so we were traveling at this time. I was up in Maine, and we were going to Prince Edward Island and staying in Canada for the summer. And I was actually on the Green Gables estate where like Anne of Green Gables was written.
Yeah,
I was actually living there for a month, and I was just walking the hills every night praying about this. And my response was like, this isn't my war. I don't want to get involved in this. But I just continually felt God pressing me. This is, just into this. Yeah. You know that where you just feel that call, and after prayer and prayer, you feel like this is what God wants me to do. And so I finally called her up and said, okay, I'll do this for you guys. I didn't know who Zen was at the time. The first time she got me in contact with Zen, I think I was a little rude to him because I thought he was like, he worked for Kathy. Like he was like, I didn't know who, I'd never heard to his show. And so he had to explain to me that he's an author and researcher of old texts and such. And anyways, so I at that time I told them, I said, I'll write this book for you guys, but it's it's going to be based on scripture alone, and talking about how delusional we become when we let other knowledge kind of inform us to supplant God's word, and how quickly we stray and become very delusional or thinking and create these false realities and such. And they agreed. And what was interesting about writing that book was that I had a notebook of just, that first year of silence, of just writing all this stuff down. Up in Canada, I didn't really have Wi-Fi. I wasn't really able to research. And they set the goal that they wanted me to have this thing published for the first annual Flat Earth Conference. They wanted to premiere it there, which was about 3 months away. So that for any kind of researcher or writer, that's a kind of a nightmare. And and so I had to, that book was hastily, like, I didn't sleep that summer in Canada. I grew gray hair, and was this the
Avoid Science Falsely So Called, or?
Yes, this was Avoid Science Falsely So Called, and it was handed into them a week early before it had to go to press, and then of course that's the first time I heard from Robbie. Robbie contacted me, and he wanted to me to go to the conference, and I ended up at the first.
That was the Flat Earth International Conference 2017. That was in Raleigh.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and anyways, the Worthless Mysteries is actually a collection of this is going to immediately like glaze people's eyes over, but it's a collection of essays. I write essays. Yes. It sounds so college like curriculum, but
it's definitely not. I can vouch.
And anyways, Worthless Mysteries actually takes the bulk of Avoid Science Falsely So Called. So this is a collection of my work, all of my work, up to 700 pages. I had to cut it. I said 700 is going to be my max, and so I actually had to edit out a lot of essays. But it's a collection of the last 2 or 3 years of my writings on any number of subjects that started out writing on Hebrew cosmology, using that as my springboard, and then going into all sorts of subjects, looking at what are the false realities around us, what has the occult developed in their imaginative thinking and created into a science, not only space and planets, but like everything from multiple dimensions, is that real, to atoms, to all sorts of stuff. Just look at all this kind of stuff and saying, where did this originate? Where there's smoke, there's fire. Why is it that these Greek philosophers were sitting around 2,000 years inventing this stuff, and all of a sudden it comes to fruition? And so that's kind of, So anyways, nobody has to really go out and buy Avoid Science Falsely So Called. I would recommend anyone just go to Worthless Mysteries and get that book and read it. It has everything in it.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the Avoid Science Falsely So Called, that was the first book, the book that you didn't want to write, that you ended up working with Zen and his group with, and it also has a lot of foundation in the Worthless Mysteries book. So after you finished this book, we got about about 8 minutes or so before we'll go to break. But what were some of the reactions and just some of your initial thoughts? And were you happy that you wrote it? Were you like, oh man, this is a big mistake? Or what was going on with that once it was released?
I think the reaction was pretty good within. I'm happy for it. If someone wants to give me a bad review, they're welcome to. I can take it, guys.
Yeah.
But so I don't say this like with any kind of bragging rights. I was almost a little suspicious of how many good responses I got over the book. I'm like, really? Like, you really like you liked it that much? I mean, come on.
Well, I came into the early spring of 2017 is when I stumbled onto the Flat Earth rabbit hole and Robbie Davidson's documentary, The Global Eye. And then I also remember it was in 2017. I do remember coming across your book, and I was thinking, man, I got to get that book. So yeah, I remember when it first came out. So yeah, didn't mean to interrupt. Just want to interject there. Right about the time that you finished this book and it came out, I was knee deep into wow, this is a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So when it came out, there was a legal issue with the cover, and without getting it, I want to say to all the audience that anyone listening that Zen and I are on good terms. I hope that we can meet at any conference or whatever and just shake hands and say, hey, how's it going? But there was a bit of a legal hiccup because we premiered the book at the first annual Flat Earth Conference, and I believe it was HBO in like the East Ukraine or something like that that got this footage. The camera crew came in at the conference and they videotaped all the books on display, and my book is there, and it was premiering, it was shown in the East Ukraine or wherever. And I guess the cover of the book comes from a which was not, of course, I had no decision in, or I'm sorry, it was not my design. But it came from like a trading card company or something in the East Ukraine. Anyways, there was a legal issue that they actually shut Zen Garcia's publishing company down, I believe, over the issue. He basically said, "Yeah, I can't sell this book anymore." And so
there was a big hiccup there, but
before that, though, even before that happened, I actually sent in my resignation with Zen, and I became very, very jaded with a lot of things in the movement. And I said, keep in mind, I wrote this book like so hesitantly, and then after publishing it, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to be a part of this anymore, and I resigned from his writing any more books with him. I said, you can just have my book. I don't even care to see it anymore. Just take it. And then he couldn't even sell it after that. He lost the rights to selling, and he gave it back to me. So then it became self-published, and that's a whole. It's just bizarre. It was just bizarre circumstances around it. But
so now that you've piqued people's interest, I know we're going to go to a break here in about 5 minutes or so. Tell folks, how do they get a copy of Avoid Science Falsely So-Called, that first book that you wrote regarding biblical cosmology?
Well, at this time, that book is actually not being sold. Like, you can go on Amazon and see it. There's actually no copies available.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the reasons being is that I transferred so many of the essays over to Worthless Mysteries.
Okay.
That and I kind of wanted to do a re-edit on that book.
Yes.
That I might premiere it again in a little bit, but at this time it's just kind of sitting there.
So if they get your book Worthless Mysteries, they will in essence they'll get a good chunk of the foundational elements, and like you said, most specifically the biblical ties to Scripture.
Yeah, so the whole point of Avoid Science Falsely So-Called was to look at the Reformation. Yeah. And it was an interesting time in church history, because here you have these guys coming out of the Catholic Church, and they were attempting to pulled away from a lot of the occult teachings and that was happening in the Catholic Church. And they had this opportunity to really get things right. And they got a lot of things right. Yeah. And they got some things very wrong in hindsight when you look back. And so it was kind of using the Reformation as a springboard to say, look at these guys like John Calvin, Martin Luther, and sure. At the same time, Copernicus comes along and really kind of, flips a lot on its head, and then, evolution follows with Darwin and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't to put myself on any kind of springboard, because my view of history is that history is kind of one big pile of dung, to put it kindly, and that there's always someone standing on the top of it, pointing down and criticizing the past. Oh, how could they think like that? And meanwhile, there's a guy keeps shoveling more dung onto the pile, and pretty soon that guy is going to be in the pile, and someone else is going to take his place, pointing down at him. Right? There's always going to be the next generation looking at me and saying, how could this guy be a Christian? Right?
For sure.
And but that was the whole springboard. And then but then with Worthless Mysteries, I took it back even further. I took back thousands of years earlier, going back through the mystery religions and showing how those developed into our whole false, reality that we really our augmented reality that we experience today.
Yes. Okay, so the book goes a little farther back into history, exposing, kind of the foundations of these philosophies and even the things that are connected to us today. So real quick, tell the folks, how can they get a copy of Worthless Mysteries?
Amazon.com, Noel J. Hadley, Worthless Mysteries. We can thank Jeff Bezos. And and of course on my blog, Our Way is the Highway, which started out as a travel blog. And all the essays that you find in my book are actually on my blog for free. So
nice. Okay.
Anybody can go there. I wrote the book live, and I would share it on YouTube or Facebook or wherever.
So if folks want to sample some of the content, they can go check out some of the essays on your blog.
Or just read the whole thing for free on there. Yeah. But,
there you go.
But I'm doing this. I'm releasing this. This is something that is a little bit academic, and I want this to be informational, and I want the research to be out there. That's the top priority for me. The only reason I published it into a book is because I like paper. I can't stand reading things online. I want to hold something in my...
I'm a paper jockey myself, so
yeah, I want to hold something in my hand and feel the touch of the pages and take notes and physical notes on the paper. And so that's why I published a book. And
I have a nasty habit of underlining everything, and making notes on the side, and I like to write scripture references in there, and so that's kind of how I roll.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to go to our break here at the top of or end of the first hour, so stick with us. We'll be back for hour 2 with Noel J. Hadley, author, and maybe Robbie Davidson will pop in for at least part of the second hour. Stay tuned here on Revolution Radio, Celebrate Truth radio show.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey guys, we are back. This is Nate Wolfe with Celebrate Truth radio show here on Revolution Radio. That's freedomslips.com. And I want to remind folks, if you would like to give a donation to Freedom's Lips Revolution Radio, you can just go to the website, freedomslips.com. You can click on one of the donate buttons. There's also an option if you would like to give monthly support. It's only like about $5 or $6, and you can have access to all of the archived shows, which is really great. And of course, Revolution Radio being the largest listener-supported radio network, over 90 hosts, just so many different topics and interesting items of discussion and listening. So please consider doing that. Also, consider going to my website, firedfortruth.org. I've got some links to videos there. I also do have a donate button there if you would prayerfully consider helping to donate and support my ministry and my family. And Celebrate Truth on YouTube. Please go check out Robbie Davidson's channel. He's got so many great videos on not just biblical cosmology, but many other important truth subjects. Lots of regular content there. He also has a 24/7 live stream on his Robbie Davidson YouTube channel. So check that out as well. There's a live chat. Always interesting discussion. Well, we are back for hour 2 and spent the first hour with Noel J. Hadley, who is an author, speaker, blogger, world traveler, and does a pretty good job of waking up early in the morning to be on 2-hour radio shows. Noel, welcome back. Appreciate you. And we were just kind of finishing up, and the music cut in on us for the first hour break. We were speaking about your books, Avoid Science Falsely So-Called, and more specifically and importantly for now, the release of Worthless Mysteries, a collection of essays on various subjects, including flat earth, God's divine counsel, the search for the immortal soul. And you were sharing with us that before the break about some of the content in the book and some of the specific things that pertain to the historical philosophies and you could say religions that factor into, the deceptions of today. So please continue sharing a little bit about some of that book content, maybe some of the most important topics as you see it, or maybe some of the most important essays from your point of view.
Yeah, let me just say during the commercial break was perfect because I'm staying in this old 18th century barn. And it's been converted into a nice little apartment, but because I'm here in Normandy in France, it's in a very old barn, and the bugs only come out at night, and they go away in daylight hours, but at nighttime I was a little concerned about coming down here for the show because our first couple nights here, the walls during the middle of the night were crawling, like literally crawling. And so I was able to go around and kill some bugs during the commercial break. It was great. They haven't been out tonight, so for the most part. But anyways, so yeah, I was out there. I was going on a bug killing spree. So a lot of people the title Worthless Mystery seems to be a little bit offsetting for some people because they're like, well, what are you saying, Noel? Like you saying flat Earth is a worthless mystery? What are you saying by that? And originally the book title was called Dark Speeches, which is probably just as offsetting for a lot of people. And there's this passage in Numbers, and this kind of made it into the intro. I kept the title Dark Speeches in there. There's a passage in Numbers chapter 12 where Aaron and Miriam, Moses' brother and sister, take umbrage with Moses, and particularly he's married to perhaps a black woman, and he's got his father-in-law always coming in and mingling with Hebrew affairs, and in this story, Miriam gets leprosy, and God immediately, before their umbrage spreads into the rest of the camp and could be poisonous and disastrous for how they view leadership, God calls a council where he brings Moses and his 2 siblings into his presence, and he says to them, because Aaron's like, don't I also speak for God? And God says to them, with him, Moses, I speak mouth to mouth.
Yes.
And not in dark speeches. I love that, because it seems like, there's someone at every wedding who wants to be the bride, and someone at every funeral who wants to be the corpse, right? We all want to be like the center of attention, and we can just go on to Facebook or the internet and take 30 seconds to scroll down, and we see all sorts of people speaking for God. Mm-hmm. And the point is that
prophets. Yep.
Well, the point is that God has spoken mouth to mouth through Moses, and he's told us, he's already told us his testimony, and it's all there. And history is filled, the history of doctrines and the church and religion is just filled with dark speeches, right? We're living in this total darkness. I love Psalms, 119, 105. It was an Amy Grant song back in the 80s. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Yes.
And I love how the psalmist has such a dark, abysmal view of the world, of reality, because here he's saying, like, we're living in total darkness. And if we feel like we're in the light, if we're self-illuminated, if we're self-enlightened by ourselves or any other source other than the Word of God, if the Word of God is not our lamp, then we need to stop fooling ourselves. We're still in darkness.
Yeah, amen.
I finally, and that's one of the pivotal themes of my writing the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I finally, Worthless Mysteries, the phrase comes from Enoch. And so this is where I put in some discretion, because Enoch is a book that is very divisive. And when I started writing this, I'm like, you know what? I'm not completely sold on Enoch myself. And that's like the worst position for anybody to be in. You don't want to be the middle of the road guy. You want to be the guy on the left or the right, because if you're the guy on the left, half the people hate you and half the people love you. And if you're the guy on the right, half the people hate you and but if you're guy in the middle, nobody likes you, right? Like nobody likes your position. And so, but I've really struggled with Enoch for years and years and years. Is this scriptural? Does it matter? All those kind of things. Asking all those kind of questions. And what I started when I was doing all my research on the occult, it could be the 19th century theosophist or going all the way back to the Greek philosophers. And one thing one theme I constantly saw was the occult giving full recognition to this idea that in a pre-Diluvian time, pre-flood, there was this, you can call it whatever you want, Atlantis type society, the crowning achievement of self-enlightenment, in which they would talk about that there was this time when there was this incursion where the men from the stars, the astral guides, angels, it could be the ascended masters, whoever, they came down and they taught us our worldly education. And so you would see this, and this is rehearsing the Enoch story, the story of the Watchers. And so here I am writing about this from the occult perspective, constantly saying, this is what they're saying, guys. And eventually I just thought, you know what, I'll just go ahead and start writing about Enoch from the other end of the perspective, because they both tie in together. So there's this great passage that I love in Enoch. And so the Watchers, Sam Jazza and what's the other guy's name? Morning, whatever. The Watchers are the Watchers are sitting around, and they're mourning under a tree, probably up near Mount Hermon area. And because they can no longer look up to heaven, they are now forbidden from looking up to heaven, and they're realizing the depth of their wrong, what they had done, and they're not being forgiven. And so they go ask Enoch, hey, you're on good relationships with God. You go to God and in our behalf. And so then this starts this whole, Enoch goes into a dream, and then for the next, couple dozen chapters, it's all a vision he has while he's sleeping at night. And anyways, he goes up in his vision, he's standing before God, and God tells Enoch to tell the Watchers he said, this is, I love this. I love this phrase. He says, you were in heaven, but all the mysteries of heaven had not been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones. Okay, so what he's referring here is, according to Enoch and according to the occult as well on the opposite end, the Watchers brought down the mysteries of heaven. They taught mankind everything from how to put makeup on women to how to create weapons of war to magic and drugs, pharmakia, all this kind of stuff. And so these Watchers had all this spiritual knowledge, but they were worthless mysteries. And so that's the platform for this book, looking around at what are all the worthless mysteries surrounding us that have origin from the mystery religion itself.
Gotcha.
I'm a historian, so I love talking about stuff like the mystery religion, the cult of Mithras, or of Bacchus, and when you try to talk to people about like how our lives today are affected by the Egyptian Book of the Dead, that's really hard to make that practical, because someone will look out their window and they'll hear a bird chirping and see the clouds, and they might see chemtrails, but they'll be like, what does that have to do with my life, Noel? Like the mystery religions, like Bacchus, but it all starts back then. This grand delusion that affects us in so many ways. And this is where I want to put another word of caution out there. I'd already said in the first hour that I consider myself a researcher. I do come across strong and passionate in some of my writings, but I want to make clear that I understand that I could be very wrong about some of my conclusions. And there was a great quote that Jaron from Jaronism said a couple years ago. He was in a debate over the flat Earth AE map, and he was a debate with someone who was debating for like the Pac-Man 4D pyramid map, whatever, infinite map, plane map. And he actually said, because he's passionately against that, which of course I am as well, because it's way too esoteric and abstract. But he said he really appreciates people who even he disagrees with, who put up a big body of work, because if he realizes that his position fails, he has now another big body of research that he can back up on. And so I hope that when people do read this book, that they can understand that I am trying to create a body of research that they do not necessarily have to agree with. And I, could be very wrong on some positions or very right. But, knowing the human predicament, how wrong we are about so many things, I just want to throw that out there, that, I'm trying to create this research, and I hope people can appreciate it for that. I'm not going to accuse anyone of being, false in their faith if they don't agree with me on, my stance of like, the multiverse not being real. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sending me a copy of the book. And like I mentioned to you in some messages, I have, read several of the essays. I think I'm up to about page 90. I had to take a break this last few weeks because things got so busy with my family's spring activities. And so a lot of my studies kind of went on hold for a bit. But I really enjoy, the flavor of the book. And I do like your writing. It's I don't believe that these are, academic, boring college essays. I mean, these really get the mental juices flowing, and it's really cool because, as you understand, everybody's in a different, stage, I guess, a different place in their truth journey. Some of us are, on similar pages on most stuff, and other stuff, maybe we're, have differing views on. But like for my journey, if I hadn't had some revelations on some things previously, I wouldn't be getting as much out of your book, because some of it I wouldn't understand. Like, for instance, the Divine Council. A friend from the church that fired me months and months ago had given us a book by Michael Heiser, and he was the first really the first author, the first person that just flat out came out with this whole divine counsel thing. And it was such a, like, what? What is he talking about? And so I've really enjoyed your book, Worthless Mysteries, the sections that I've read, the essays that I've read, because I had at least some foundational idea. And so when you covered those subjects, I was like, oh, yeah, he's covering this subject. This is so interesting. And I know you warned me, you said, hey, I tried to organize, it's a lot of essays. I've tried to organize them into, categories of thought, but some of them are kind of random. And actually, I think you did a pretty good job of kind of grouping, topics together. And so I've enjoyed, I'm almost 1/7 of the way through. I kind of look at it as a book that I'll be chewing on, for a while, and I'll probably come back to certain essays. And, I may even share, since you have them free on your blog, I may occasionally share on social media, a certain essay and say, hey, here's my thoughts on this. You got to check this out. Go to Noel's blog and look up this particular essay. So yeah, I appreciate the effort that went into this. I mean, I'm writing my first book, as you know, and it's not going to be a very big book. And I've kind of stressed on, well, gee, what if it's not, X amount of pages? And I think I had a revelation this last week where I said, this first book that I'm writing is really about two things. It's about my testimony and my journey of truth. And more importantly, it's about how God plays into that, how the Father in heaven has played into this and what he has done, since I took a stand for truth and got fired. And so I decided that I'm just, mostly pretty much wrapping up what I want to say. And, however many pages it's going to be, it's really more of a testimony. And then down the road, I may do something a little more extensive, relating to biblical cosmology. But anyway, I digress. But Worthless Mysteries, there's a lot to offer in this book, and I like how the essays are, fairly succinct, and so it's not. It's not like some books where you dive into this super, super long chapter and you're just like, man, this is really interesting. But like, you cheat ahead and you're like, okay, only 37 more pages to finish this chapter. In Worthless Mysteries, you can read through several essays in a setting, or you could just do one short essay if that's all that you have the time for. So I like the way you've arranged it and compiled it. But yeah, so didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there, but I just wanted to put my 2 cents in about the book, and I hope that folks will check it out. And there's a lot of value, I believe, and I know you would agree, in understanding the origins, of the mystery religions and the cults and how that fits in today. Because as you said, some people don't have a clue. And they wouldn't have the first idea on how this pertains to their life today, why this matters. So please continue. Any thoughts that you think are important, for folks today to consider regarding all of this underlying philosophy?
Well, I guess I can go in any number of directions. I could talk about the mystery religions themselves, or some of the ways that some of these developments we take for granted on very innocent levels today. And
maybe pick one or two of the top things that you're like, man, if I had one or two things that I could share with folks today to spark their interest, to do their own research and to get further down, the tip of the iceberg, what would one of those be? What do you think is important for folks to understand and to study for themselves?
Well, when you look at biblical history, it's interesting that when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they completely dumped the Egyptian mystery cult of Isis behind with them. They didn't practice mummification, for example. And I love mummies. I was able to just go see mummies in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian. And and understanding how mummies come into the development of our modern religious thinking. It's outstanding. But when you look at biblical history, obviously it wasn't so great in Hebrew history. They did not have a love for God, many of them, and they went astray and they worshiped Baal and all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of blending where they would have, like, Yahweh had his consort and all this kind of stuff. But there was always a coming back to the faith in the end. But something really odd happened with Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great is one of the great antichrists in history. He was a student of Aristotle, who in turn was a student of Plato, coming out of Greece. And I back in my college days, I was a philosophy major. I used to love these guys. I used to be like, the C.S. Lewis mindset that Plato is practically Christian. And now I look at this stuff and I go, I see how just perverse his stuff is and where he's getting all his information from. And so Alexander the Great, it really all begins with Homer. And Homer, while the Bible was being compiled in Israel and Judea, you have Homer, the blind barge, compiling his own book, and there's a big debate on whether Homer existed or not. But the point is that Homer, his writing, that was the Bible for the Greeks. This was the esoteric. This is where you went to learn about yourself, your own divine self. And so Alexander the Great slept with a copy of Homer under his bed every night. He loved the Iliad, and he has this vision one night where apparently Homer comes and visits him and tells him where to build the great city of Alexandria. And Alexandria is in Egypt, and this is one of the great poisons in the history of the world. And this is when he builds Alexandria. This begins the age of Hellenization. Interestingly enough, the age of Hellenization ends with Cleopatra and Mark Antony dying in the city of Alexandria, when Octavius, who becomes Caesar Augustus, comes to conquer them. But in that time, you have Platonism, which spreads worldwide. It's almost like the 1960s when you hear talk of, like, there's this new religious, this feeling in the air. Well, it was the same thing in the centuries leading up to Christ. It was explosive Platonism, and all of a sudden this immortal soul concept became, everybody wanted it. So you understand that the immortal soul teaching, which became almost like McDonald's hamburgers with Plato. Plato actually ripped off the Eleusinian mysteries, where in the Eleusinian mysteries they were teaching the neophyte, the initiated, how to conquer themselves, how to reach within and grab that divine self, the immortal soul, and that they go on and live afterwards. In Egypt, the mummies, that was the whole point of the mummification, that you had very, very few people could actually inherit eternal life in Egypt because you had to be mummified, and that was an expensive process. With Hellenization, and so everyone else who died, they just died. That's it. So with Hellenization now, the cult of Isis, they have to rebrand themselves to Bacchus and the Eleusinian mysteries, and they start giving immortality to anyone who wants to become initiated, even if they can't be mummified.
Oh wow!
And so this is where you'll hear this kind of spoken in back corners of churches and stuff about Hellenization. Oh, we need to be careful of this, because this is when religious thought became really askewed, and all of a sudden, you have all these what we call now like extra biblical books, apocrypha or whatever, that are being written that are heavily Hellenized. And so I kind of take a stand against a lot of those books, even though they're sometimes popular in the truther movement. And so we actually see this is one of the hard, I guess, fields to plow, because I talk a lot in here about my belief that the immortal soul doctrine, this idea that we're dualistic in nature, and that when we die, we don't we don't really die because our souls escape physical death and we float away or we go somewhere. This all originates with Plato, and Plato, of course, stole this from the Mysteries. And in my book, I talk about when Socrates died in a book that Plato wrote called Phaedo, and excuse me if I don't pronounce that right. I'm in a French-speaking country and can't even pronounce any French right, so don't call me out on my Greek and Latin. But Socrates is accused of corrupting the youth, and he is forced to commit suicide. He's given a cup of poison hemlock, and he's sitting on his bed and he's given his last instructions to his disciples, and he introduces to the world globe Earth. Really fascinating read. He introduces globe Earth and also the immortal soul. And what's interesting is that this is where I wanted to. This is kind of where my research led me, where I was looking, where did the origins of globe Earth come from? It's clearly esoteric in nature. And so for Socrates and Plato, the fact that the Earth was a globe inside another larger globe, which would be Ptolemy's whole geocentric system, the idea is that when you die, your soul is able to ascend up to the stars. And this goes right back to Enoch, right back to right. We go up and we live with the stars. They are our divine relatives. We too. This is the transmigration of souls, and this is where it starts getting really corrupted in the church history. And so, I put a lot of research into that area, and I call it Hebrew mortalism. I believe that the Hebrew writers had a very different understanding of themselves, of death, of who God was. I believe that the Hebrew writers believed that only God was immortal, that death is death. And it's interesting that when you're talking about the great deception of our ages, you get into a conversation with someone and you're like, well, where should I begin? Should I start with the moon landing? Do I start with September 11th? Do I start with vaccines? Where do we go, right? And it's you can easily take this all the way back to the garden. And one of what's fascinating about the couple of lies that the serpent told to Eve is that they were so simple and yet so complex that we're still debating them to this day. And one of the things he said was, will you really die? I mean, he's questioning this. And to this day, we're still in the church asking this question. What is death? How do you define death? Is there consciousness after death? Where do you go after death? Right? All these questions. And so here he asked this very question, and we're still debating it to this day. So
I get questions all the time, like Facebook Messenger. It's always these kind of subjects. It's not like, hey, how's your day going? Blah blah blah. It's more like, hey, I have two questions. One is where do we go after we die, and the other one is fill in the blank. But so these are deep subjects. But like you said, there's a historical precedent, and it is interesting. That you mentioned those things. I mean, it's definitely worth considering. And I imagine you have some essays in Worthless Mysteries that, can help people understand some of that background and some of the influence. But I never really thought of these things until, Flat Earth for me was like the big, key that opened up, I guess, my mind to checking out other, subjects as well. But so I mean, definitely the Greek philosophy, a huge, influence, and we see that in Scripture we have the exhortation to not fall into deceptive philosophy and knowledge and science falsely so called, and I mean there's many warnings, as and so we do have to be willing to examine, the foundations of things that we teach and believe and say, hey, is this of man, or, does it have potentially its origin in the philosophy and wisdom of man, or is this really truly from the Father? Is it the word of God, or is it the word of man?
Yeah, as a parent now, it's kind of interesting when we're trying to raise our kids. I've got 2 4-year-olds, and they're really into. I get one of the things I talk about in one of the essays. I talk about, it's called Teenagers and American Invention.
Yeah.
And I go into what I think is really interesting is that America really did invent the teenager. That when you look through the annals of history,
Yeah.
they actually didn't exist. And
Wow.
one of the
Yeah,
moments,
thanks a lot, America.
well, I quote John Lennon in there, and John Lennon, he's in the late 50s, early 60s, late 50s, and the Brits became obsessed with Elvis Presley. And a lot of they had to get a lot of stuff on pirated radio, but they talked about, John Lennon said, in England, for example, you had a child, and they were expected to be a child until they became an adult. And you could think of things like say Peter Pan, right, where the children are up in the nursery. Don't bother us when you're ready to be adult. Come down to the rest of the house.
Yeah.
And that's the way you can even think of American Western, like the dad is riding off on the horse, and he looks to his 9-year-old son. He says, you're the man of the house now, right? And so, and everything changed. They started changing like the 1940s in America after the war with the Bobby Soxers, and then I go into how, interestingly enough, in the same token, the Brits, the Victorian era, actually created the modern day child. And then that's like, what? People are like, what are you talking about? But even more so, I go in that same essay, I go into anthropomorphism. And anthropomorphism is this idea that of talking animals, right? And this is something we take for granted. But my kids today are surrounded with talking animals. Everything from Sesame Street to, every book has cute little talking bunnies and stuff.
Dr. Doolittle.
Yeah, well, but what's interesting, if you look at the history of anthropomorphism, it actually did not exist, with the exception of Aesop's Fables, which was predated Christ. Anthropomorphism did not exist in literature until Charles Darwin. And when Charles Darwin came along, and this idea of our evolutionary origins, that we are connected to the animals, that we're not creating God's image, that we come from the animals. All of a sudden in literature, it became explosive. Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland was one of the first to write of anthropomorphism. So think of like the Cheshire Cat. And this came in the 1860s. This is just like, he was a contemporary with Charles Darwin. And pretty soon you have like Wind in the Willows, and then Winnie the Pooh, and all the Beatrix Potter stuff. And then pretty soon C.S. Lewis with Chronicles of Narnia. And now it's just, back in the 50s, you read a kid's book and it's like, Run, Jane Run, and that kind of stuff. And now it's all so it's one of those things where, like, as a parent, it's realizing, because we have the Word of God, right? But the competition is so extreme, because one of the things that really what Flat Earth has done for me is to reevaluate the Bible and go, wow, like. And you read Genesis, Exodus. There's not a lot of room for imagination in there. Like, God doesn't want us to be led into perverse thinking. He says, like, this is reality. This is what it is. This is what you're gonna stick to. And then
and he's very repetitive to say, remember now, keep these commandments. Follow me. And he breaks it down, and he's like, okay, if you follow me, there's going to be blessings. If you break from this, there's going to be curses. I mean, like you said, it's a pretty narrow road.
And so, in the Truther community, and now just so everyone knows, I do not celebrate Christmas, but there's a heavy attack on, like, Santa Claus and all that kind of stuff, and the whole Christmas holiday. But then it's like, here I am, a parent, reading about fluffy bunnies and bears, that talk and wear clothes and stuff, and recognizing that this originates with evolution, and the point of this is to lead them into a Darwinian thought. And so those are all like those are all the conflicts we have. And those are the things I'm trying to show in my book, just these realities, these day-to-day routines around us that all come originally from the mystery religion. They all come from there. And those are the conflicts that we have to live in on a day-to-day life and try to
that's a really good point, because like you said, we take it for granted. I mean, it's everywhere, right? And we don't think for a moment that, is this strange? Is this something that would be connected to mystery religions, Babylon, Egypt. I mean, we don't consider that, right? But like you said, we're so saturated. And I guess I don't know what the antidote is. Obviously, spiritually, salvation-wise, it's the truth that sets us free. But also, that continued principle of, knowing the truth will set us free. And we know that the prophet spoke about, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, for lack of, understanding and discernment. And, I think of these, I'm kind of jumping around here, some different thoughts, but, in the Old Testament, it talks about the men of Issachar, and it doesn't say a lot about them, but it says, they understood, the times, and they understood what Israel should do. And these were men who had an awareness of what was happening, with the cultures around them, with specifically with Israel. So yeah, I'm glad that you went down that road and shared that thought, because it is true. I mean, any parent that has young kids, or even my kids, my youngest is 15, my oldest just turned 21. But I can remember, a lot of these shows. And when I was younger, I remember, Winnie the Pooh and Watership Down was like this edgy, kind of scary show about these rabbits, and all these rabbits were talking, and, they had their community. But yeah, it's everywhere. It's pervasive. And, that's just one subject, that you've brought up that's connected back to these mystery religions.
Now, to be fair, I'm going to have some people accuse. I could see the headlines: Noel Hadley hates Winnie the Pooh, and where anthropomorphism is concerned, there are actually anthropomorphist historians out there, and they will point out that in the development of talking animals in literature, that Winnie the Pooh is a little bit different because he is a child's imagination through a stuffed bear. So I'll just throw that out there, throw that bone out to the audience. But just think of this as a parent, that we're in a point in history, and this has never happened before, that we will sit our children in front of talking animals to teach them what it is to be human. Just let that thought.
That's deep, man.
Yeah, and so, anyways, that's one of the. So one of the that's one of the things that's really, again, tough about showing how our reality has changed due to the ancient mysteries. And I'll one of the things people really like hearing about is like movies and stuff. So I'll talk about The Matrix, and how that's actually my belief is it actually takes you through the 7 steps of what it is to become, starting out as a neophyte, the 7 steps of initiation into the deeper mysteries. And by the end of it, Neo becomes one of the ascended masters. He becomes one of the Watchers, flies off. And what's interesting about when you understand that in the mysteries, one of the best texts we actually have on the mysteries is called the Golden Ass. It was written in the 2nd century AD, I believe. And it survived the Christian purging when they were going through and burning all the pagan texts. And it is one of the clearest pictures we have of what it is to become an initiate in the cult of Isis. And the cult of Isis is all around us. If I have a few minutes, I'll talk about that. But if you think of Disney movies like Pinocchio or Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice and Fantasia, those are actually retellings of the Golden Ass, and they're teaching us how to become an initiate into the cult of Isis. Oh, wow. And there's a you can think of this in a lot of Hollywood films. Like, for example, Pinocchio goes into the giant whale. And that is his representation of dying. When you go into these people who are running our society, who to this day go through this, who ascend, when the goddess Isis, and this gets into the divine council, but when the goddess Isis appears to the man in the golden ass, he has gone through his death experience. He survives it, and she proclaims his that he will be under her providence of she is Lady Liberty. Think of the Statue of Liberty.
Got you.
And that he will be under her divine providence, and that she will give him his job and his career and his wealth and all that kind of stuff. And so you can look at like even like the Skull and Bones and how they have to like go into like a coffin, and it represents their death and coming through and stuff. But I'm being reborn. But think of that moment in the Matrix where Neo actually dies and then he comes back to life. Mm-hmm. There's a really fascinating account in the Golden Ass where he actually goes into the netherworld. He dies, and he has to. We don't really know what that looks like. But what I do know, reading a lot of modern contemporary occult literature, is that those who have been open enough to talk about the experience, they say many people actually do not survive it. And I actually think that's where we get a lot of celebrity deaths from. They're always found in a hotel room, high on drugs or whatever, but they're dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's always the same story.
Pretty cliche, yeah.
But what's interesting is that he sees the sackcloth of the netherworld, and he sees the black sun. But I actually think that this is where the whole space mythos came from. It came out of Egypt with Nuit, but this when we look at the spacewalks and all that stuff, we're looking at representations of what I believe is occult practices.
Yes.
We're actually looking at basically astral projection, this idea that their astral body is ascending outside of their temple.
Oh wow!
And all this kind of stuff.
I never thought of that connection. And then you've got all the, SpaceX and Elon Musk and all kinds of symbolism depending on who you talk to. I know my buddy Joe Hill from YouTube, he would definitely have some things to say about that. But yeah, that's quite interesting. I never made that connection with the spacewalks, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it goes back to stuff like the cult of Mithras, and that was a big competitor for early Christianity. Constantine was to the end of his life was in the mysteries of Mithras, and these guys would go into these caves and these tombs, pretty much. This is think of like the Beatles when they started out in the Cavern Club in Liverpool. That was an old Mithrian cavern.
Oh, really?
And they would take psychedelics, and they would lay down, and they would ascend. They would actually astral project, apparently, into the heavens, and they would meet their astral guide, and they would come, and it was all about preparing for their death when they make the final journey up to the stars, and when they could meet Mithras himself, and some of the most disciplined would need to meet him. And the point is that when you look at stuff like a spacewalk, and this comes, I mean, I it's fascinating how even when you like deal with like shamanism, and you look at, I talk in my book about in the 1950s when LSD and peyote started becoming popular again. It starts coming out, and the CIA gets involved with this stuff, and they start doing these experiments, and the very language of their trips when they're going through the curtain beyond into, they're going through the cosmos themselves on their trips, and they're explaining all this stuff, and they're actually using the exact same language that like Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would use with the Apollo 11 moon landing. And they actually, interesting enough, that they all tie in together. And so that's where I think we're seeing a lot of, we're seeing these ceremonies. My friend Will Goodrich, who runs The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, would say the same thing, that this is all just elaborate ceremonies taking place that go back to the mystery of religion.
Hey, no, that's awesome. Hey, 1 second here. Looks like Robbie is ready to jump in here. I want to try to add Robbie into the call here real quick. Hopefully that will work out okay. We'll catch him for the last few minutes here, but let me just add him in real quick. I'll do this correctly here. All right. Okay, let's see if I can get Robbie in here. Robbie, are you with us, bud?
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
Fashionably late, but we're glad you made it, man.
Yeah, I didn't think I could, but heard you had a good show. I actually tuned into it on my landing, so I got some signal and I tuned in, and everything sounded great. How you doing, Noel?
I'm doing excellent. So a Canadian, an Ohioan, and a Frenchman walk into a bar.
Yeah, man, it's been Robbie, it's been a really great show, and man, this last 30 minutes or so, especially, we've dove pretty deep, making the connections into mystery religions, and now he was talking about science, scientism, and the spacewalks and Apollo missions and how all that connected. And I know we only have about 9 minutes or so left, but yeah, Robbie, you have any questions for Noel or anything you want to share?
No, I'm looking forward to actually listening to the show, but he's done some fantastic work with his first book, Scientism, or Science Falsely So-Called, and then also with his new book. So glad we were able to get him on the show. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. This is a first for me. I definitely try to make all the shows, but it's kind of hard when you're in the air and they have no Wi-Fi, right? So
no, we understand, man. I'm glad everything worked out to get me to be able to, call in and get things rolling. And Noel and I probably could go 4 or 5 hours, no problem. So there really wasn't any pressure. But yeah, Noel has been really sharing a lot of good thoughts about some of the essays in his book and connecting the mystery religions to things in our culture today that are so pervasive. And I have been enjoying the beginning of the book, or at least the essays at the beginning of the book. And now he's piqued my interest further with some of these other, connections to, Disney films and, esoteric, hidden meanings. And so it's been really cool, but we're glad that you got everything squared away on the passport, and you guys have completed your first of 4 legs in the plane.
That's right. 1 down, 3 to go. So we are going to be staying a couple days in Chicago. So we have a 15-hour flight. It doesn't leave here for a few hours, so we've got a bit of time. But then it's a 15-hour flight. And then we stay in Chicago for a couple of days, and then we head to Minneapolis, and then from Minneapolis back to Edmonton. So 4 flights in total over 2 days. So
stranded in Chicago. That reminds me of a couple of movies, Home Alone, and then also Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. But anyway, so Noel,
living the life, Robbie. You're living the life.
Yeah, and Noel is over there in France, and he was kind enough to go to bed early so he could wake up very early in the morning, and I could foresee maybe having a round 2 with Noel.
So he's in the future, but he's not as far in the future as I am, because right now it's Sunday, going to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday.
Wow.
Yeah,
what time is it for you, Noel?
Yeah, we've been having this conversation from 2 separate dates. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. I love doing shows in the future. I've been doing quite a few here in the last few weeks. But with the New Zealand,
well, let me give you the news here. That the future is not that exciting. It's dark outside right now and sleepy.
Nice.
Oh well, it's windy. I was just outside there. It's windy here in the future. If you're into Sunday afternoon in New Zealand, it's pretty windy. But I was just going to say that with the Flat Earth Conference here in New Zealand wrapping up, when I land, I'm going to have 1 day rest, and then I'm in my car driving for the Truth Quest Calgary conference, and looking forward to seeing you, Noel, in Dallas, Texas, in November. I think it's going to be great. We're all going to be able to meet up at that point. I know you weren't able to come out to Take on the World 2019, but anyways, we will definitely be able to all see each other this fall in Dallas, which I'm really excited about. So
that'll be great
to have you there.
And looks like we got about maybe 5 minutes or so left. So why don't, Robbie, since we have you on, why don't you give us a couple of links or whatever to your sites or contact info, whatever you want to share regarding Celebrate Truth?
Sure. I mean, on YouTube, it's Celebrate Truth. I have my personal channel as well, Robbie Davidson. I'm actually running my 24/7 live stream there right now, currently. Cool. So that's on my personal channel. And I mean, look me up on Facebook and all those other great links.
Instagram and Mr. Robbie D on Instagram and all that good stuff.
That's right. You
awesome.
got it. Yeah, you got it. So I'm just going to be busy with lots of conferences. Like I said, I have a day rest, and then I'm heading off to Truth Quest Calgary for that conference, which it will be pretty much a Question Everything 2019 reunion almost, right? Because you got Mark Sargent, and you've got Jared Cressman, you got all the bunch there. So looking forward to that. But it was good to tune in. I don't want to hug all the time. I'll let Noel
jump in here. Give us any information for links regarding the book or social media. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, well, my where I did all these writings live was on my website, my blog, Our Way is the Highway. And that started out, of course, as a travel blog. And then it became, I'm taking like pictures of my kids, and all of a sudden it looks like a Terrence Malick film because I'm talking about all this like philosophical stuff and flat earth and all that kind of stuff. And then you can, of course, my book, Worthless Mysteries, is on Amazon. And feel free to come by Facebook and, send in a friend request, and love to get to know you guys.
Yeah, you're on Facebook as Noel J. Hadley.
Yeah,
is that right?
And then, of course, my YouTube channel is Our Way is the Highway as well.
Yes. Yeah, and there's some great videos on there, and I really enjoy, listening to the videos that you put up on YouTube as well. And I mean, we've shared some of that information. Please consider checking out his YouTube channel, friend him on Facebook or message him there. You can go to my Facebook. I'm Nate Wolfe, and it says Fired for Truth in parentheses there. My website is firedfortruth.org. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at nate@firedfortruth.org. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Some people will use the Facebook Messenger, but it's kind of hard sometimes to respond to everybody through that platform. But we've had a great discussion. We've covered a lot of ground. Really appreciate the folks at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, all that they do, the 90 or so hosts and all the programming. And appreciate, Robbie jumping in here. Obviously, he's been super busy, and it's cool that he was able to jump in here in the last several minutes of the show. After all, it is his show, so I think it's important to have him dive in here. But we've held down the fort pretty well. I'm looking forward to maybe, if Robbie decides to do a premiere there on Celebrate Truth YouTube. And depending on the time zones, again, maybe we can invite Noel to jump in on the live chat if we have that available, as we've done in the past. So
we'll make it happen. Yeah, we'll make it happen. We'll do a premiere on YouTube here in the next couple of weeks. We'll just see what the scheduling is like. Like I said, I'm pretty far behind on episodes, but we definitely will get it up there, really soon. I know the premieres go over really well, and we definitely will want to get all the information out, especially everything that you've discussed. I'm looking forward to actually hearing the show. Like I said, I caught just a few minutes in the plane when I was landing just to make sure everything was all good. And it sounded like you were doing a great job. Discussion was flowing, and I'm really happy. And I'm thankful that you were able to take up the mantle while, I was not able to do it. So
thank you. Thank you, both of you, for having me on, Robbie and Nate. Thanks for the talk. Can I just throw out there really quick in the minute I have? I almost forgot. I'm actually, for anyone listening to this live, I am actually handing my book out on Sunday. That's my time. For free on Amazon, a digital download for the ebook. So if anyone wants to go there, download it, go get it for free.
Awesome.
Nice.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. Take advantage
over
of
to
that,
Amazon
folks.
on Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. Take advantage
is that
of
Sunday? Is that Sunday in the future, or is that Sunday? I'm just kidding. It's Sunday. It's all good.
Sunday my time,
Yeah.
but it actually starts midnight Pacific Standard Time. So if you're on the East Coast, don't wait up till 3 o'clock.
All right.
There we
Well, there's the music. So thank you guys for joining us tonight on Celebrate Truth Radio. We'll sign off for now, but catch us next week. Take care, and God bless.
Blessings.
Don't miss Celebrate Truth with Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate every Saturday, 7 to 9 Pacific, 10 to midnight Eastern on Revolution Radio. They talk the Bible and how it exposes a lot of lies in the world with special guests, roundtable discussions, and call-ins from you, the listeners. This is not your typical Christian radio show. Celebrate Truth with Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate every Saturday from 7 till 9 p.m. Pacific, 10 midnight Eastern on Revolution Radio.